3 months ago today, the United States and Israel struck Iran. The peace deal that was supposed to end it is still unsigned. The president has publicly described the location of 440 kilograms of enriched uranium in at least 4 different ways in 6 weeks, each one contradicting the last. Gas costs $1.50 more per gallon than it did in February, and the man now running the Federal Reserve inherited the worst possible hand at the worst possible moment. Let me take all of this apart, because what we're looking at today is not a collection of separate stories. It is one story about what 3 months of improvised foreign policy actually costs in diplomatic credibility, in household budgets, and in institutional coherence. Start with the nuclear dust, because CNN published something last week that deserves to be read slowly. CNN's politics team documented the full chronology of Trump's positions on Iran's uranium stockpile, the 440 kilograms of material enriched to 60% that has sat at the center of every failed negotiation since February. What they found is not ambiguity or strategic vagueness. It is 4 substantively different positions issued by the same person over 6 weeks, each one appearing to be the settled U.S. position until the next one superseded it. In late March, Trump told reporters that the uranium was buried so deep from American B-2 bomber strikes that he didn't care about it. He suggested it could be monitored by satellite, we'll always be watching it, and declared Iran already incapable of getting a nuclear weapon. That was the U.S. position as of late March. Then on April 17th, Trump told Reuters, "We're going to go in with Iran at a nice leisurely pace and go down and start excavating with big machinery. We'll bring it back to the United States." That became the U.S. position as of April 17th. On April 26th, he doubled down. "We have to take that nuclear dust." Then came his May 29th Truth Social post, which is the most specific public statement he has made on the subject. He wrote that the enriched material, sometimes referred to as nuclear dust, was buried deep underground with virtually collapsed mountains, caused by our powerful B-2 bomber attack 11 months ago. It would, he declared, be unearthed by the United States, which it is agreed is the only country, along with China, with the mechanical capability of doing so, in close coordination and conjunction with the Islamic Republic of Iran, plus the International Atomic Energy Agency, and destroyed. That post was the basis on which Trump sent back the MOU draft to Iran with amended language. The Sufran Center confirmed Saturday that Trump requested the draft be revised to include specific timelines for Iran's nuclear commitments and a clear stipulation that Iran must end its control over the Strait of Hormuz immediately upon signing. Iran received the amended draft. Iran's state media and officials called Trump's demands totally unacceptable, a phrase Trump had previously used about Iran's counter-proposals. The Times of Israel cited an Israeli source, saying there may be a split between Iran's negotiators and the supreme leader himself. Araghchi and Ghalibaf may have reached working points, but they do not have signing rights. There are, the Israeli source said, no indications that Mojtaba Khamenei has said yes. The MOU is still unsigned. Here is what CNN's documentation of Trump's 4 positions actually reveals. The President of the United States has been setting nuclear policy through social media posts in real time, with each post representing whatever his current thinking is that day. Don't care about it. Watch it by satellite is a fundamentally different strategic posture from joint U.S.-Iran excavation with big machinery. Both cannot simultaneously be the considered policy of the world's most powerful country. When the U.S. president says, "It is agreed," that only the U.S. and China have the mechanical capability to excavate the material, that claim appeared on Truth Social, not in any official arms control document, not through any verified negotiating channel, not after any confirmed conversation with Iranian officials. Iran's reaction was immediate. "We agreed to no such thing." This matters beyond the specific negotiation. Every time Trump states a new position publicly, Iran's hardliners, particularly the IRGC and its media affiliates, use it to argue that the U.S. cannot be trusted to hold any position long enough to build a deal around it. Tasnim news agency, which is IRGC affiliated, has published multiple analysis pieces this month. arguing that Trump's shifting demands prove any agreement would be revoked the moment it became politically inconvenient. That argument is being made by Iran's most war-willing faction. It is being fueled inadvertently by Truth Social. Kalshi's prediction markets put the probability of any U.S.-Iran nuclear deal before November at 55%. That is a coin flip. 3 months after a war started over nuclear breakout concerns, the probability of a nuclear resolution in the next 5 months is essentially even odds. Per CENTCOM's own strike activity on Saturday and Sunday is being maintained by the same mechanism that makes it unsustainable. Both sides absorbing small escalations, calling them proportionate, and hoping the other side blinks before the fiction collapses entirely. Now, let me tell you what this war has cost Americans who are not negotiating it. In February, the U.S. national average for a regular gallon of gasoline was $2.98. As of Monday this week, it is approximately $4.32 based on AAA data cited across multiple outlets. At its peak in late April and early May, it reached $4.50 to $4.52, up more than 50% in less than 3 months. This is not a small price shock. This is the largest sustained gasoline price increase since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. The Consumer Price Index came in at 3.8% annualized in April, the highest reading since May 2023. The increase was driven, per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, by a 5.4% monthly rise in gasoline prices. Core inflation, which strips out food and energy, rose 0.4% month-over-month in April and sits at 2.8% annualized. The Federal Reserve's target is 2% and has been for years. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, could hit 4% by year-end, according to the Cato Institute. Double the target. The human face of these numbers. Whirlpool reported last week that revenue dropped nearly 10% in its most recent quarter and called the Iran war's consumer confidence impact a recession-level industry decline. Oxford Economics forecast this week that 2026 will bring the slowest annual consumption growth since 2013, excluding the pandemic. Researchers at Stanford's Institute for Economic Policy Research found that the spike in gas prices has more than wiped out the higher tax refunds many American households were expecting this spring. And here is the distributional fact that is almost never named directly in the mainstream coverage of inflation data. This pain is K-shaped. Lower and middle-income households spend a significantly higher percentage of their budgets on gasoline than high-income households. A family earning $40,000 a year and commuting to work is spending roughly 5 to 8% of their take-home income on gas right now. A family earning $200,000, a year, is spending less than 1%. The gas price increase from this war has fallen hardest on the people who can least absorb it. Not because anyone planned it that way, because that is how energy price shocks work in a K-shaped economy. The White House has described this consistently as temporary disruptions stemming from Operation Epic Fury. That framing is not wrong in the long run. If a deal is signed, oil prices will fall, gas prices will ease, and inflation will moderate. But temporary does not describe the experience of someone who has been paying above $4 a gallon since late March and whose wages haven't moved. For them, the temporary disruption has already been 3 months long, has already consumed money they expected to have, and is continuing with no signed deal in sight. The number that matters to that family is not the annualized CPI. It is the difference between $2.98 and $4.32, multiplied by every tank of gas they've filled since February 28th. That calculation doesn't appear in the economic forecasts. It's being run in millions of household budgets right now. And then there is Kevin Warsh. The Senate confirmed Kevin Warsh as Federal Reserve Chair sometime in the past 2 weeks, per PBS and AP. He takes over from Jerome Powell, who had served since 2018 and whose term as chair expired May 15th. Warsh is Trump's chosen successor, a former Fed governor, a Morgan Stanley investment banker, a man who was on Trump's short list for the job in his first term before Powell was chosen instead. He comes in with the president's confidence and a mandate that is not entirely clear. Here is what his inbox looks like on his first week as chair. Inflation is at 3.8%. The Fed's target is 2%. The war that drove inflation has no signed peace deal. Gas prices, which are the primary inflation driver, remain above $4 a gallon and will not fall significantly until the Strait of Hormuz is cleared, which requires a signed MOU that nobody has approved. Trump has repeatedly demanded rate cuts, calling Powell insufficiently aggressive in stimulating the economy. Trump's own fiscal policy, the Big Beautiful Bill, adds an estimated $3.4 trillion to the projected deficit over the next decade, which puts upward pressure on long-term interest rates through a mechanism that the Fed cannot control regardless of what it does with the short-term rate. Oxford Economics moved its next Fed rate cut expectation from June to December. That forecast was made before this weekend's renewed military strikes. If the war escalates, if the ceasefire fiction collapses, it would likely send oil prices higher, inflation higher, and the argument for rate cuts further into the distance. Warsh faces a choice that has no clean answer. He can cut rates as Trump wants, which would stimulate an economy showing genuine consumer weakness, but would do so while inflation is running at nearly twice the Fed's target, potentially fueling a broader inflationary spiral and demolishing the Fed's credibility as an inflation fighter, which is what the data argues for, but which would frustrate a president who nominated him precisely because he expected alignment, and which may not be sufficient if the war persists and energy prices stay elevated. He can hike, which is what the rate market has been pricing in through 2031, but which would deepen consumer pain and risk tipping a weakening economy into contraction. There is no good option. There is only the question of which bad option is least bad and most defensible to the 4 million people who will lose their jobs if the wrong call is made. That is the inheritance Warsh is stepping into, an economy that the war made worse, a fiscal policy that makes the Fed's job harder, and a president who will publicly criticize him on Truth Social if he doesn't cut rates on the schedule Trump prefers. Powell was publicly attacked repeatedly. Whether Warsh will, whether a man chosen by the president has the institutional independence to hold his ground against the president, is the question that determines whether the Fed's credibility survives this period intact. The answer will emerge over the next 60 days. Watch the June 16 to 17 meeting. Watch whether the May CPI, releasing June 10th, moves his language. And watch whether the Iran MOU gets signed before that meeting, because a signed deal with oil prices falling gives Warsh room to cut that the current situation does not. 3 months of war. A president who has publicly described the location and fate of nuclear material in 4 different ways. Americans paying 50% more for gas than they were in February, with the sharpest pain falling on people who have the least capacity to absorb it. And a new Fed chair walking into a room where every rate decision is harder than it should be, because a conflict that was supposed to be quick and decisive has been extended by a negotiation that keeps being announced and keeps not being finished. The question I'd ask you to sit with is this: at what point does the cost of an incomplete deal exceed the cost of a bad one? The administration is holding out for terms. Specific nuclear timelines, immediate Hormuz control, zero enrichment concessions that Iran has rejected every time they've been presented. Each week without a signature is another week of $4. 32 gas, another month of 3.8% inflation, another basis point of pressure on the Fed, another week of Lebanon burning, another round of executions in Iranian prisons. A deal that is imperfect but signed has a value that the current situation does not. The question is whether the people at the negotiating table have a framework for calculating it. Nothing in the last 3 months suggests they do.